Saints Row began as a humble IP back in 2006. Taking inspiration from some of the great open-world crime games of the time, they mixed it with the gang culture of the time and called in many outside resources to give them reference points for the game. That way they could make as gritty and realistic an experience as possible. They meticulously handcrafted a city known to fans as Stillwater, they filled it with life and soul, they made a story about an up-and-coming gang known as the 3rd Street Saints with a likeable cast of characters that players fell in love with. They designed a multiplayer mode where the community came together to play and enjoy the game, building connections to one another from the platform Volition had created. They had an intriguing rank system where players battled it out to be on top, using various techniques, and the game sold very well for a small team. They had managed to surpass over 1 million units by the end of 2006. This pushed Volition to make a sequel to the much-loved gang simulator, but sadly, we're not able to move on just yet. You see, despite Volition's first Saints Row performing well financially, it was gaining a title known as the GTA Killer. This pushed the game's own good points to the side, due to it only being known as the game that's kinda like GTA. The issue of this is that the game was essentially labelled a GTA knockoff. I guess not all attention is good attention, and this will come back to bite them later on. But fast forward 2 years, the hit success of Saints Row spawned another title, Saints Row 2. Volition releases what people consider to be the peak of the franchise, a title that completely expanded upon the original game. Bigger budget, bigger scope, better game in most areas really. The story was better than the first game by most people's accounts. It ramped up the action movie moments, making it slightly less grounded but 100% more awesome. The cast was still awesome and it still felt like the Saints Row people know and loved. The city was even better, more features and things to do in the game were added. The multiplayer, while downgraded, it was enough to keep the original fanbase playing for a while. Essentially, Saints Row 2 took most of what people loved, made it better, and left fans content with the future of the series. But when we look at how the game sold numbers-wise, it kinda gets tricky. Apparently the game sold around 2 million by the end of 2008. However, it appears THQ were actually disappointed in how the game sold. It also, with more attention on it, got less than favourable reviews. I believe IGN at the time scored it somewhere around a 6.3 out of 10. They of course went on to correct this as the years went by, but this was just an unbelievably low score for a very good game that was clearly overshadowed by the GTA clone attribute. Speaking of which, the game also hit the peak of the franchise being known as a GTA clone. Everywhere you looked, Saints Row 2 was always in the conversation with GTA, despite it outshining it in some areas. It was always seen as a subpar counterpart to the Grand Theft Auto series, which just was really unfair. Saints Row 3 comes out a few years later and is essentially a soft reboot to the franchise. New map, overhauled characters, overhauled gameplay, no multiplayer, and it was honestly weaker in a majority of areas, whilst also being the game with a massive marketing campaign behind it. The game, whilst fun, just didn't match up to the quality of what came before it in a majority of areas. This is where the decline of Saints Row begins, right? Well, in terms of quality, sure. In terms of sales, far from it. In fact, with arguably being the weakest game in the series, it sold a peak of 5.5 million units. This is the best Saints Row has ever seen, both from its inception and to how it is nowadays. It's at this point, however, THQ start having financial troubles. Volition were partway through making a big Saints Row DLC, and THQ forces them to make it into a full game, which is why we ended up with a game about fighting aliens. They essentially intended for this title, however, to be a send-off to the series, with a bunch of callbacks and such, and whilst in my opinion it was executed well, it meant an end for the series. Or so they had planned. Sure, we had Gat Out of Hell, but there's not too much to say there. It's essentially just a bonus DLC for Saints Row 4. So at this point, the game's declined in quality after 2 never reaching that peak once again. Sales-wise, 4 did fine, meaning it ended up turning a decent profit, but the quality of the game just wasn't there. But it's fine, Volition moved on to a new project and Saints Row was fondly left in the past to collect dust. Volition then made Agents of Mayhem, which caused them to lose over a third of their staff with how badly it bombed. This is also after they partnered with Deep Silver when Saints Row 4 was midway through production and THQ went under. So after Agents of Mayhem failed, they went back to all reliable, Saints Row. They rebooted the game and well, I don't even know where to begin. New casts, bad cast, new map, new gameplay style, lack of quality and polish. Point is, it was hated by fans. It felt offensive to even call it a Saints Row game. The game, whilst not setting the world on fire, didn't sell tragically, but it wasn't enough. The quality and reception of the game was pretty weak, and the sales weren't enough to save it from being the failure it is. The game bombed. Then, 3 mediocre DLCs later, the Embracer closes Volition, with all hope of a good Saints Row game dying alongside them. The downfall of Saints Row, it's a sad one to watch, and an even harder one to be a part of. To watch fans of the series think they've hit rock bottom, only for it to get worse with the next entry, it was and still is quite heartbreaking to behold. To watch a franchise so peer pressured by the online gaming space that it has to change its own identity just to keep up. To watch the great ideas the team have be poorly executed due to management, budget, or time constraints, or sometimes a combination of the three. But worst of all, to watch fans feel betrayed, to feel the love and passion they invested in the early titles thrown in their face. That's where Saints Row really died. Plenty of IPs come and go, but communities, they stick around. And Saints Row has possibly the most split community in gaming. It's a shame, honestly. Volition created some of the greatest titles out there, and their downfall was very much tied into the downfall of Saints Row. But what was it that actually killed Saints Row? Lack of quality? Poor direction? Bad marketing? Truthfully, throughout its entire franchise, it's had pretty much all of the above. But to me, the main thing that killed it, I guess, was just its identity crisis. It didn't know what it wanted, or was even allowed to be. Peer pressure from people online, mixed with the pressure of publishers closing, or wanting something different, caused the games to be so different themselves, even the fanbase couldn't keep up. The great quality of its past haunted it through its future. It's a shame, really. A lot of creative ideas lived and died with this franchise. Its bitter end overshadows the status it once had. So, what now? Good question. I'm of the opinion that the franchise is honestly over for me. I'll struggle to be invested moving forward. It's not impossible for the game to recover, I just don't think it will. Maybe if they reboot everything and make it a gang simulator, we could just go back to basics, or maybe it's just all well and done, and we should just say goodbye. Or maybe it doesn't even matter at all. Saints Row had one of the most tragic declines in gaming, and sadly it declined so hard it went into the grave, taking the developers with it. I'm gonna miss it, honestly. I had some good times with this franchise. Hell, we all did. But thank you for watching this video. I thought going over the history of Saints Row briefly to explain how we got here would just be kind of a cooler video. I guess it kind of hits me harder now knowing the franchise is gone. But games come and go, so just like I said in my last video, it's time to move on. But I don't think I could leave without a good send-off. This doesn't mean I'm stopping all Saints Row content. I know a lot of people have had this panicking fear, myself included. There's been times where I'm like, I don't want to do Saints Row anymore for sure. But I don't think I could fully drop it with just how much I've invested into it and how much it's become a part of my channel's identity. But I don't think I can post it as frequently as I did because, well, kind of over now. Maybe when some big news comes out, I'll start talking about it a bit more frequently. But for now, I hate to say it, but these videos will be a little bit few and far between. But again, don't worry, there will always be another Saints Row video on the way. You may just have to wait a little bit longer than usual. But yeah, thanks for watching. I really appreciate you sticking around. If you're new here, I'm sorry that this is such a bleak video, but I think it's an informative one, and I think as fans of the series, you guys deserve to know how we got here. Anyway though, thank you all so much for watching. If you want, you can subscribe, I'd appreciate that a lot. But anyway, take care, see you soon.